I thought the scraping sound I had been hearing inside the walls was just rats. I didn't think much of it. My house was old and wooden, located by a small forest. Bugs and vermin were a bit of a given when I bought the thing at a price so low it seemed almost a desperate plea for someone to take it off the realtor's hands. So I put traps around the house, sprinkled rat poison in pods, even had pest control stop by. None of it helped. The scratching continued weeks later. I ignored it the best I could. That slow scraping in the boards. Every night, the sound of something raking its claws along the inside of my home traveled in the air, almost similar to a knife sliding along a cutting board. The scratching would travel from room to room, taking its time to make sure nothing went untouched. Finally, it would start directly behind the headboard of my bed, a dragging that made me grit my teeth. Even still, I pretended nothing was wrong. Until, one morning, I awoke to a frenzied scratching in my living room, interspersed with loud thuds. This was accompanied by a panicked wailing, unlike anything I have ever heard before. I skipped calling animal control and phoned the police instead. It didn't take too long to find the issue. They pulled a small boy out of my walls as I stared in shock. He was covered in dirt with wild eyes that twitched with each shake of his body. I explained to the officer that I thought it was rats that had been pestering me for weeks. Luckily, he believed me. I called to check on the boy later that day. There wasn't much to tell. He had been delusional from hunger and panic. I was amazed he hadn't been affected by my attempts to get rid of what I thought were rats. He was able to speak, but hadn't made much sense to anyone. He was convinced there was something in the walls that had kept him there. He said it needed him because it had been hungry. Everyone thought he had just been hallucinating. I felt sorry for him, but glad I could finally get some rest. That night, I went to bed without a sense of dread. Things were okay. Then, my phone rang out in the silence. I answered, alert when I heard the shouts of the officer over the line. From what my sluggish brain could piece together, they had found the boy's relatives after calling around. He had recently been reported missing. He had only been gone for 2 days. There was no possible way he could have been making those sounds for as long as I had been hearing them. He wasn't the cause, but neither were rats. Fear seized in my chest as the sound of scratching, slow and taunting, began in the wall right next to my head. During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and there we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to various homes we had lived in when I was much younger. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless. Chasing after another boy in the backyard of our house in North Carolina. Trying to build a raft to float on the creek behind the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania. And so on. But there's one set of memories which remains as clear as glass. As though they were just made yesterday. I often wondered whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring. But in my heart, I know they're real. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine, population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't even see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space. But it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute to my father's place of work. The day after my 5th birthday, attended only by my parents, I came down with a bad fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It was horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, leaving my room pretty barren. My mother brought me ginger ale and books several times a day, and these served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, though, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth, because his mouth was rather large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, his eyes, his crooked ears. But his mouth was by far the largest. "You look kinda like a Furby," I said as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look.
"Furby? What's a Furby?"
he asked. I shrugged. "You know, the toy. The little robot with the big ears. You can pet and feed them, almost like a real pet."
"Oh."
Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity.
"You don't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend."
I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stopped by to check in on me.
"I lay under your bed,"
he later explained.
"I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore."
We didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. The 3rd or 4th morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face.
"I have a new game we can play,"
he said.
"We have to wait until your mother comes to check on you, because she can't see us play it. It's a secret game."
After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under the bed and tugged my hand.
"We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway,"
he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me to leave my bed without their permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out at the ground below. We were on the 2nd story of the house, but it was on a hill. And from this angle, the drop was much farther than 2 stories due to the incline.
"I like to play pretend up here,"
Mr. Widemouth explained.
"I pretend that there's a big, soft trampoline below this window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather. I want you to try."
I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. "It's a long drop," I said.
"But that's all part of the fun. It wouldn't be very fun if it were only a short drop. If it were that way, you might as well just bounce on a real trampoline.
I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through thin air only to bounce back to the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realist in me prevailed. "Maybe some other time," I said. "I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt." Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment.
"If you say so,"
he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box.
"I want to teach you how to juggle,"
he said.
"Here are some things you can use to practice. Before I start giving you lessons, of course."
I looked in the box. It was full of knives. "My parents will kill me," I shouted, horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought the knives into my room. Objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. "I'll get spanked and be grounded for a year." Mr. Widemouth frowned.
"It's fun to juggle with these. Come on, please, just try it."
I pushed the box away. "I can't, I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw in the air." Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was underneath me. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up at night, saying he put a real trampoline underneath the window. A big one that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to jump. He wasn't so much fun to play with anymore. My mother came to me one morning and told me that I had her permission to walk around outside. She thought some fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined to my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out to the back porch, yearning for the feeling of the sun on my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me.
"I have something I want you to see,"
he said. I must have given him a weird look because he then said,
"It's safe, I promise."
I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail which ran through the woods behind the house.
"This is an important path,"
he explained.
"I've had lots of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day, I hope to take you there."
I returned to the house, wondering what kind of place lay beyond the trail. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into a moving truck. I would be in the cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth that I would be leaving. But even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intentions were not to my benefit, despite what he said otherwise. For this reason, I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a 6-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who is about to run a marathon rather than one who is about to spend 2 days sitting still.
"Early enough for you?"
he asked. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder.
"This is the last time, son. I promise. I know it's been hard for you, as sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make some new friends."
I opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway. I saw Mr. Widemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn onto the main road. He gave a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife in hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house stood upon was empty except for the foundation, as the house burned down a few years after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Widemouth had shown me. Part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the crap out of me. But I felt that Mr. Widemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The deer trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I then noticed something strange. Many of the tombstones in the cemetery all belonged to children.
A couple of days ago, I listened as my sister explained to her young daughter the difference between rational and irrational fears. She used an example. A rational fear is something you're smart to be scared of, like venomous spiders. An irrational fear is something that's silly to be scared of, like clowns. My sister grinned at me as she said it, and I did my best to grin back. Unlike the rest of my family, she had been making an effort to reach out. I appreciate her kindness. But sometimes kindness can be exhausting, you know? Sometimes I just want people to treat me like I deserve to be treated, with reproach and disgust and hatred. I've done horrible things, and though I haven't suffered enough, I have suffered. My wife left and took our little daughter with her. I was diagnosed with lung cancer last month, even though I had never smoked a cigarette in my life. I even had to sell my house and move into this shithole. All this, and I still haven't approached atonement. I work a quiet desk job now, 9 to 5, doing no evil except punching hour after precious hour into the time clock. But no matter how much I endure, I'll never be able to make up for what I did at my old job. You see, I used to be a clown. And let me tell you, being frightened of us is the most rational thing in the world. It all started with the squeak. I was 24 at the time, fresh out of law school and unable to find work. Sitting on a park bench feeling sorry for myself, wondering how I was going to make ends meet. And then I heard it. The squeak. It was immediately followed by a chorus of laughter. Young laughter. I looked up from my bench, past a section of grass barely visible through the fallen leaves. And there he was. A clown, surrounded by a gaggle of children wearing party hats, fixated upon him with glee. My first instinct was slight discomfort. I never liked clowns. Yeah, I had read the Stephen King book, and that certainly contributed. But it was more than that. I didn't like the idea of a regular face behind the paint. A face that kids could never see through to. A face that could have been anyone capable of anything. But, as I watched this particular clown plot around the grass, intentionally tripping on his oversized shoes and cranking out balloon animals with a speed nothing short of astonishing, something shifted in my perspective. We fear clowns because we fear what we do not know, I thought. But the unknown doesn't have to be bad. The more I watched, the more entranced I became. I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like the guy under the paint and silly clothes was genuinely having a good time. And as I pondered the prospect of extended unemployment which could only be relieved by a grinding, soul-sucking job hunched over legal papers, I grew a little jealous. Suddenly, I found myself wondering how much this guy got paid. As much as $200 a gig. The clown, whose real name was Jeff, told me when I approached him after the party. and sometimes 3 or 4 gigs a day. I did the math in my head. $600 to $800 a day was definitely livable. Hell, it was more than livable. It was downright enticing. Jeff pulled out a cigarette and lit it. "You don't mind, do you?" he asked through a puff of smoke. I shook my head. He had been surprisingly fast about wiping off his makeup, and the face underneath the masquerade was clean-shaven, calm, unassuming. He looked to be about 35 or 40. "So, is there like a clown school or something? Do you have to get certified?" Jeff let out a laugh that was strangely harsh. "Clown school? Hell no, man. You just put on the suit and fuck around for a couple of hours. You can do anything in that suit, man. Even if you just sit around making fart noises. If you're wearing the suit, those kids are gonna laugh." "So you like it then? Being a clown?" He grinned at me, half perplexed, half understanding. "Oh yeah, you'd be surprised. You get to make kids laugh. Nothing better than making a kid laugh, in my humble opinion. The pay is good, you control your own schedule, and chicks actually dig it, if you can believe that. I've laid more than one fine piece, you know. Single mom or something who was grateful I made her kid's birthday party a hit or whatever." He paused. "And of course, there's other perks, too." He emphasized that last sentence enough that I had to ask, "What other perks?" At this, Jeff tossed his cigarette to the ground and crushed it with his foot, clearly meaning to go. But before he left, he reached into his pocket and handed me a card, emblazoned with the words, "Clown around with us," in bold, colorful letters. "Call that number if you're serious about this," he said, pointing at a series of digits at the bottom of the card. "Maybe you'll find out." 5 years later, my life was great. Happy, peaceful, and fulfilling in every way. I was married to a beautiful woman. We had a daughter together. And we had just moved into a nice place in the suburbs. And yes, before you ask, I was a clown. I still kept in touch with some of my old law school buddies, friends who had gone to work at big firms and clerk for important judges. And you know what? They were all miserable as fuck. Every last one of them. They never would have admitted it, of course, but I could see it behind their eyes. The 70-hour work weeks and the endless stream of paperwork took a major toll. Here they were in their late 20s, early 30s, the best years of a man's life, if he played his cards right, and they were drowning in the deep end. What good is a private tennis court if you never have time to play? Me? I was living within my means. But that was no problem. Clowning was fine money, and nobody raked in more of it than me. I had a hunch I'd be good at it. But the truth is, I was more than good. I was a natural. Before long, I had made a name for myself. And parents were tripping over their own regular-sized shoes to get Helpful the Clown at their kid's birthday party. Before you roll your eyes too hard at the name, try and imagine that shtick. A clown named Helpful who constantly tries to be helpful and constantly fails. If Helpful tried too hard to cut the cake, it would somehow wind up in his hair. If Helpful tried to clean up a mess, it would somehow become an even bigger mess than before. Usually, I'd get someone else to guest star with me, shaking their heads exaggeratedly at all of Helpful's misgivings. To say the kids loved it would be a huge understatement. Yes sirree, times were good. Until the police showed up at my door and led me away in handcuffs. Helpful the Clown tied another balloon animal, a duck, it looked like, and led Ariel Clayton, age 4, farther away from the house. He beckoned into the open seat of a car and slammed the door behind her once she got in. Then he hustled to the driver's side door and sped the car away. I couldn't believe my eyes. The detective stopped the tape, which had been taken from the doorbell camera of the Claytons' home. He raised an eyebrow at me. "Still sticking with your story, then?" he said. Tears started to flow. I couldn't help it. That wasn't me. It wasn't. I don't know who that was, but it's not me, I swear to God. The detective grimaced. Yeah, we know. I sat there stunned. What? What do you mean you know? That footage was taken just after 4 p.m. Right, I was in the backyard entertaining kids. I know. Mr. and Mrs. Clayton told us, as did some of the other parents, so unless you could be in 2 places at once, it wasn't you. I started to feel angry. Well then why the hell am I here? Why'd you try to make me confess to something you already knew I didn't do? Just because you ain't the guy doesn't mean you don't know who the guy was, he responded matter-of-factly. Come on, kid. This one of your friends? I bristled a bit at the man calling me a kid. I was almost 30. Did he think hairy arms and rolled up sleeves gave him the right to talk down to me? All I know is that isn't me. I'm not saying any more until I talk with my lawyer. The detective leaned right next to my face and snarled. Fine, you unhelpful piece of shit. But hear this. If something happens to that little girl and you know anything you're not spilling your guts over right now, her blood is on your head. Jeff listened intently to my entire story. He sat up a bit straighter when I told him that I had discovered one of my spare helpful suits had gone missing. So it has to be somebody I know, right? I asked, bewildered. Either that or some random person broke into my house and kiffed my suit. Yeah, that about covers it. He sighed through a cloud of smoke. I had no idea how Jeff afforded so many cigarettes. Hell, I had no idea how he afforded the vast majority of his stuff. I thought as I looked around his living room. The latest in entertainment systems. A stunning grand piano. Elegant bookshelves filled completely with leather bindings. I mean, being a clown paid the bills, but I didn't see how it could pay for all of this. Somehow, in our 5 years of friendship, I had never worked up the courage to ask. So, what are you gonna do? He asked. What can I do? I've fully cooperated with the authorities and they don't want anything more from me. They know I don't know anything. Still, I paused, contemplating my situation. I don't know if I can keep clowning. I mean, the helpful brand took a pretty hard hit. I doubt I can recover from this. Already my appointments are getting canceled. Nobody wants to mess around with the clown thing anymore. That's bullshit, he said dismissively. It'll calm down. Kids get jacked all the time. If it was some dude in a plumber suit, folks wouldn't stop hiring a plumber. They'd just move on. Just lay low for a while, and then build your business back up. Easy for you to say, I said, gesturing around at the grand living room. Finally, I could take no more. I just had to know. Man, how the hell do you afford all this stuff? I live on a budget, and I get more gigs than you do. He laughed, a cold, bitter sound. Yeah, you do get more gigs than me. Almost accusatory. Sorry about that, I said quickly. Hey, I'm gonna run and use your bathroom, if that's okay. I was halfway down the hallway when he called my name. I poked my head back to the room. Yeah, what's up? I'm, remodeling that bathroom. Use the one downstairs. Third door on the left. I shrugged and headed down the stairs. When I stepped into the main room in the basement, I realized I had never been down here before. But I immediately saw why. In contrast to the impeccable floor above me, the basement was utterly dilapidated. I walked through in disbelief, wondering how somebody could stand to live on top of such filth. An intensely strong odor filled the air, and it seemed to be coming from behind a closed door at the beginning of the hallway. Despite my misgivings, I opened it, and a wave of the smell nearly brought up the contents of my stomach. Covering my nose and mouth, I looked into the room. I don't know what I expected, but this is what I saw. The room was empty, save for one small twin-size mattress on the floor. The floor was covered in piles of excrement and vomit. Bloodstains smeared the walls. The last thing I saw was a collection of leather straps on the mattress, and a muzzle. Is everything okay down there? Jeff called down from the top of the staircase. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Yeah. I'm good. I called back, quietly closing the door to that awful room and making my way down to the third door on the left. The one Jeff had told me was the bathroom. I swung the door open, and my bladder emptied. It wasn't a bathroom at all. It was a closet, and only one item of clothing hung within it. My spare Helpful the Clown suit. So, yeah, we need to talk. I whirled around. Jeff was standing about a few feet away from me, smiling, blocking the hallway. I backed myself into the closet, feeling the clown suit brush up against my neck. Stay away from me, I demanded feebly. He just laughed. Calm the hell down. I ain't gonna hurt you. Besides, I need you for this next part. What are you talking about? We need to pin this on somebody else, my man. I can't keep that thing in my closet for much longer. That suit is public enemy #1 right now. You're not gonna kill me? I stammered. Why would I kill you? We're friends, remember? I'm the one who got you into this game in the first place. Nah, you're gonna go home and get some rest. And I'll figure out who's gonna take the fall for all of this. A lot of cops have been driving by here lately. Maybe I'm paranoid, but... His voice trailed off. And how do you know I won't report you? I asked. Why do you trust me? Well, you're already a person of interest. How do you think it's gonna look if the kidnapper turns out to be one of your best friends? Think you'll be able to convince a jury you had nothing to do with it? Maybe, but I doubt it. Especially with all that money I gave you. Money? You didn't give me shit, I said, confused. Check your account. I pulled out my phone and selected my bank's app. Sure enough, Jeff had wired me a sizable sum just a few minutes before. 50 grand. You son of a bitch! There's some gratitude for you, Jeff said easily, as though we were talking about the goddamn weather. Now listen here. You've got a choice to make, so make it very carefully. You can work with me, and that money will keep on coming. As long as you do everything I say, you'll get a payment of 50 grand every month. Your other choice is to go to jail for a very long time. I began to panic. What are you, some kind of pervert? You think I did something to that kid? You're out of your mind. I kept her here for a couple of days and then I sold her. She left this morning. My head was spinning. I grabbed the doorframe for support. Sold her? Sold her? To who? Hell if I know, he said, but nobody's ever gonna find her again. That you can be sure of. He was right. I never saw Ariel Clayton again. To the best of my knowledge, nobody did. She wasn't the only one. There were so many others. So many children. To this day, I don't know who we sold them to. And I don't know what became of them. All I know is that once they saw the clown, their lives would never be the same. I didn't like it. I never did. But I had no choice. Because Jeff gave me a quota. 1 child a month. If I failed to provide, he guaranteed my daughter would be next. Apparently there were others like me. Guys who got involved in clowning because it seemed like a way to make kids happy. Guys who wound up getting caught in the most despicable underground trade imaginable. Some of them, like Jeff, came to like it. The power, the control, the money. Others, like me, just couldn't handle it. There is no sight worse in this world than a child's face when they realize that they've made a terrible mistake.
That they shouldn't have lusted after that balloon armadillo. That smiling clown face. And those squeaky shoes. That their parents, who spent so much time lecturing them about things that must have seemed so trivial, were right about stranger danger after all. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they scream. And sometimes they just sit there quietly, as their innocence slowly floats away. But without fail, they are simply too small and fragile and weak to stop it. I never hurt them. I never touched them. I don't think any of us did, actually. But I doubt the same can be said of the people we sold them to. I'm not stupid. I know I bathe in those sins. That's why I could never treat my daughter the same once it all began. That's why my wife finally had enough. I don't know if I believe in karma, but this life I now live is a convincing argument for it. The lung cancer is extraordinarily painful. The loneliness is almost overwhelming. The guilt is so heavy I feel I may be crushed. But maybe the worst thing of all is the fear. You see, when I finally managed to extract myself from the business, not all of the clowns were on board with that. Some wanted to put a bullet in my head right then and there. Eventually, it was decided that I could leave, but it was made very clear to me that if I breathed a word of this to the authorities, my daughter would be taken. I want to turn back the clock and take back everything I've done, but I know I can't. So I want to at least do something to make this right now. I didn't say anything when my sister told her daughter, who is about the same age as Ariel Clayton was when she was taken, that clowns are an irrational fear. But I can pass the word along to you. Please, listeners, tell your children. Be afraid of clowns. Be very afraid. Mom, Dad, I'm adopted. My parents ceased their activities. My mother, adorned in a pearl necklace and earrings to match, stood upright. Upon both hands she wore oven mitts and a matching apron. Her teal sundress really did bring out the blue in her eyes. She closed the oven and removed the mitts, revealing perfectly manicured nails. My father sat his pipe on the end of the table and closed his book. His hair, just a touch of gray, was immaculate as ever. He wore a plaid shirt and a soft tan cardigan. He removed his reading glasses to look me in the face. Almost in unison, they asked, "Why, dear? What makes you say that, son?" Before them, I stood, pressed khaki pants, tucked in button-down shirt, and my matching belt and shoes. I felt both at one with and detached from the people before me. I just know. I tried to sound confident, but at the time, my confidence was lost to pubescence. Don't be ridiculous. My father stood in the light of our perfectly lit kitchen. He placed his hands on my shoulder and looked me in the eyes. You're our boy, and we love you very, very much. I studied the lines of his face, seeking no, pleading for a lie, but there was none. Sit, dear, my mother interjected, opening the stove. Dinner is nearly ready. I sat at our polished wooden table and placed my napkin in my lap, an old habit from etiquette school. I felt my eyes moisten. Are you sure? I was able to ask, staring at the blank place on the table where my food would soon be. My mother placed prepared plates before my father and I. He said a brief grace for the table and began eating the roast and potatoes my mother had so delicately prepared. Positive, he said, savoring his bite and wiping his lip. My mother sat last with her plate on the other side of the table to my left and took my hand. You're our baby, she said, looking me in the eye and assuring me I was her offspring. Now, let's talk about something else. You haven't said hello to our guest. My eyes and face were wet and red. I stared across the table. The woman before me was tied to her chair. Ropes ran from her throat to her feet, keeping her from any free movement. Across her mouth was tightly wound duct tape, and her head had slumped forward. The only appendage not tied down was her right arm. It was not a kindness extended, but rather unneeded. Her right arm was severed below the shoulder. Blood was still actively pouring from the poor bandaging and soaking her side a deep red. Her eyes had rolled back into her head in a loss of consciousness from the extreme pain she had just endured. My parents shared a laugh over it being seasoned so well. I took all this in again and cried out in a whisper, "Please, tell me I'm adopted." It starts with sweaty palms. You try your best to gather the immediate surroundings as you see the crowd growing. You look for the closest exits. It makes you feel dizzy and you start breathing heavily. You feel nauseous. You're far more anxious than you should be, given the relative safety of the situation. But your mind goes to different places. You envision the crowd turning for some reason, of everyone rushing to the closest door as though their lives were on the line. The chaos that ensues. I've lived through it, and I wish to share it with you all today. Most people don't understand just how quickly a large, orderly crowd can turn into absolute anarchy, of just how disgusting and appalling the entire mob becomes. They might read a headline, 4 trampled at overcrowded event, and think that it sounded terrible. But they've never really thought about just how horrible such an experience would be. Some of us do think about it. Constantly. The moment we're in anything close to being considered a crowd, it's precisely where our mind goes. And it terrifies us. It makes us scared of even existing. Inoculophobia, it's called. The fear of crowds. Or more specifically, the fear of what a crowd can become. I haven't always suffered from it. In fact, it's actually very new to me. 4 months ago is when I first started feeling discomfort in a large crowd. I know it sounds crazy, but I think something supernatural was involved, as though my phobia was actually just a premonition. But more on that later. When my phobia set in, I became sort of a recluse. I usually work from home and only rarely need to go to my office. When I did need to go out, I avoided rush hours and crowds. I didn't understand where this phobia came from, but I already seemed controlled by it. I felt as though I wasn't supposed to leave my house, no matter what. So I tried as best I could to remain there. But then the problem occurred, when I had no choice but to go to work midweek during regular hours. When I was stuck with all those people in the office. When I wasn't able to get a taxi home. When I was left with no choice but to take the subway. When a track was closed and I was detoured to Central Station. When 80,000 people left the concert. When 80,000 people left the concert. And things would get much worse. I was walking through the station when the mad rush of concertgoers poured in. All my symptoms hit me at once. The sweating, breathing, dizziness. I couldn't hold it in any longer and I vomited into a trash can. And still more people came. It was getting close to shoulder. People weren't even moving any longer. It was congestion. I was stuck. Yes, it was a terrible situation for me to be in. And yes, I would have done anything to avoid it. But I was coping with it as best I could.
I kept telling myself it wasn't the end of the world and I would be fine. And then I heard the screaming. It was dozens of people, about 150 feet away from me. Already people were starting to crowd together and push. And then, the gunshots rang out. Mayhem ensued. The mob started rushing towards any exit they could find. There was shouting, shrieking. The people around me pushed together so fast that I got swept away with them. At some points, my feet weren't even touching the ground. We were all just moving as one large mass. The gunshots rang out again. Even more hysteria crept into the crowd. My phobia was sidetracked for the moment. I was starting to realize how much danger I was actually in. I entered a survival mode. The chances of those bullets killing me were very slim. No, it was the mob that was the danger. And that's when I realized everyone around me was living my phobia. But when it's a real danger such as this, it's not a phobia at all. It's real. Your fear is real. Experience real. And you'll do whatever you can to survive. The mob of people quickly became congested as everyone poured towards the exits. We were all huddled together as more and more pushed into the mass. The closer you were to the exit, the more weight that was pushed against you. It was simply impossible for people to leave those tiny doors at the same speed that people were pushing towards them. The more frightened people became, the harder they pushed. And the harder they pushed, the more weight it put onto those near the exits. The more difficult it became for them to leave. The more difficult it made for them to draw breath. The tiny woman beside me looked as if she was suffocating. "Are you all right?" I shouted at her. She just looked back at me, expressionless. She was in shock. I think she was starting to figure out that she might die right here, at any moment. She then spoke. I still to this day am haunted by it. "This is all your fault," she said. I couldn't make any sense of it. Did she really just say that? Or, as a result of my phobia, had I started hearing things? I'm taller than average and can see over most adults. I saw that my section of the crowd, maybe 500 or so people, was trying to make it towards a double-door exit, but very few people could leave at once. Very slowly, my group started making its way over. I almost lost my footing on a few occasions and would have fallen over if not for how close we were all huddled together. It took me a while to realize what I was almost tripping over. People. We were now trampling on dozens of people who had fallen. I couldn't see or hear much in the commotion, but I noticed that some of the people we trampled were still alive. Some would even grab at our feet as we shuffled over them. I stopped moving for just a moment and I looked down. My right foot was on a woman's neck. 7 people or so were standing on her in some way. Another person's foot was on her jaw. For just a moment, between all the crowd, our eyes locked. She was somehow, impossibly, still alive. I saw panic and confusion looking back at me. Terror. Horror. There's no way we could help her up. There was just no room. We were all barely able to breathe, let alone help those who had fallen. A woman behind me was somehow still holding onto a tiny crying baby. It looked about 6 months old. The people around her were trying as best they could to guide her through the mass. I looked away. I knew she wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. A man to my left had organized a few other men and I heard them shout, 1, 2, 3, and they together pushed hard against the crowd. They were able to create a tiny bit of space for just a moment, and the leading man was able to pull up from the ground what I assumed was his daughter. She appeared to be 10 years old. She was covered in blood. I don't think she was alive. The man looked at me, pointed. The anguish on his face was overbearing. "Look what you've done," he said. "How dare you? Look what you've done! I looked around. In an instant, everything went silent. It felt like everyone in the room was staring at me. For just a moment. But then, all the sounds and movement returned in a blast. The woman with the 6-month-old was now screaming, "My baby! I've lost my baby!" I saw a man duck down into the crowd to try and get it. I didn't see him come back up. I doubt he ever did. "My baby," she kept screaming. "Shut up!" a man yelled back at her. "Your baby's dead. Everyone's dead." I looked ahead and saw that the mob had finally pushed me close to the exit. But it wouldn't be easy to get out. So many people had fallen near the doors that the only way out was to climb up a ramp of bodies. This was not a rare occurrence. If you have the stomach for it, Google such events. The station nightclub fire comes to mind. So many bodies pile up that the exits get blocked. I started making my way up the ramp. If I had to estimate, I would say it was a pile of approximately 50 bodies. Most dead, some still clinging to life. The man in front of me was elderly and was moving slowly. Those who can't keep up get buried below. I know it's cold to say it, but we weren't human beings any longer. We were animals, desperate for a way out. Any way out. The people behind me had caught up. They were about to climb over me. I could feel them. I had no other choice. I jumped onto the elderly man to climb over him. Then the others followed behind me. He was stuck, permanently. He couldn't get out. I made it to the top and had just enough room to squeeze through the door frame to get out. I heard the old man shout from behind me, "You're not going anywhere." But I was on the ground. I had made it, and there was no turning back. "Get back here!" I heard him yell from behind me. He was shouting over and over, "You can't leave. You were supposed to die here. This is your fault." But I left, to the sounds of hysteria, screaming, horror, death. Thousands of people were trampled that day. 240 casualties. Only 4 died from the shooting that started it all. Had those people really spoken to me like that? Said that it was my fault? That I was supposed to die there? I don't know. But it's what I remember. Maybe I was confronted so harshly with my biggest fear that my mind couldn't handle it. Maybe I only imagined that they said those things. And it's strange. Such a horrifying event should have made my phobia much worse. But that's not what happened. My ankylophobia ended that day, and I haven't had any problems in the months since. I only suffered from ankylophobia for 4 months of my life. I sometimes think it was a warning. It was a premonition of things to come. I somehow knew what was going to happen to me. And the phobia was created as a precaution to try and keep me at home and to protect me. And just the other day, another strange thing started occurring. I live on the 18th floor of my building and have never had a problem with heights. But if I look down now, I feel strange. It starts with sweaty palms. You try your best to gather the immediate surroundings as you see the ground getting closer and closer. You look for the closest areas of support and stability. But the heights make you feel dizzy, and you start breathing heavily. You feel nauseous. You're far more anxious than you should be, given the relative safety of the situation. But your mind goes to different places. You envision yourself starting to fall. Acrophobia, they call it. The fear of heights. I had never suffered from it before. Not in the slightest. No. It just started all at once that day in the apartment. Maybe it's another premonition. Maybe it's another warning. And maybe, just maybe, I should find a new apartment. Something that's on the first floor. I've been wanting to get something off of my chest for a very long time. The only person who knows the whole story is my wife, and she didn't find out until we were already engaged. I didn't have anyone to talk to about this, because anyone who knows will think ill of me. It's been 15 years since these events took place, so I finally feel safe enough to talk about them anonymously. I had a really hard time in high school. Traumatic events in my childhood combining with hormonal changes didn't make me the most easygoing guy. I'd consider myself handsome now, but at the time I was 5'4", paler than fresh linen, and bone thin. My hobbies were all indoors and solitary in nature, and I found it difficult to make friends. I was the lone wolf that everyone warned you about. The only friend I had in the world was my creative writing teacher, Mr. Artis. He was an older guy, but I think he saw some of himself in me. He let me hide out in his office to avoid the jocks who taunted me daily. We would talk about writing and what we were reading, but most of the time we just talked about life. He had talked me down a few times. I was massively depressed. Suicidal even. I never went through with my plans because he was always there for me. He talked me through things that I thought no one else would understand. He understood the anger like no one else did. I hated the boys who would bully me. I hated the girls who would giggle at me as I walked by. I hated the other teachers who would turn a blind eye. Or the ones, like my gym teacher, who almost encouraged it. I think if it weren't for Mr. Artis, I wouldn't be here to tell my story. If I hadn't had him to talk to confide in, the self-loathing and anger and disgust would have bubbled over a lot sooner than it did. And I'm thankful for that. My junior year of high school, Mr. Artis got sick. They didn't tell us what he had, but he missed almost a month of classes. Not having anyone to talk to took a toll on me. I wasn't allowed in his office alone, so I also lost my hiding spot. Being around more often meant that I was an easier target. The assholes who would torment me day in and day out stepped up their game. Almost every day was torment. The bullying escalated from just taunting me to physically hurting me. I was punched square in the face one day. Another time, they slammed my hands in my locker and locked it shut. For those of you wondering, the metal bent around my fingers. On top of everything going on at school, my mom and dad had been fighting for a while. The week of the event, my mom left. Neither of my parents understood me. But my mom tried. Leaving me alone with my father is something that I still haven't forgiven her for, 15 years later. I know what I did was stupid. I know that it was the most drastic solution to something that would change over time. I didn't see it that way though. My dad kept a gun in the attached garage. It was loaded and tucked away for emergency situations, such as going to shooting ranges with his buddies. On Monday, I took the gun to my room. Dad didn't notice that it was missing, because the drawer where it's kept is mostly empty. I posed with it in the mirror, practicing my icy stare. I knew right away what I wanted to do, although the thought of just using it on myself crossed my mind a few times. I didn't want to go out like that though. I wanted to leave a lasting impression. I counted the bullets in the gun 17 times. There were only 3. I didn't know where to find more ammo, so I knew that I would have to make every shot count. One bullet was for John Carter, the asshole who filled my locker with urine-filled balloons. The second bullet was for Mike Wallace, who catfished me for weeks pretending to be a girl in our class, and then stood me up and made a mockery of me when I asked her out. The final bullet was for myself. I didn't want to go to jail, and I sure as hell didn't want to keep on living. On Friday morning, I tucked the gun into the waistband of my jeans, wearing a large hoodie to cover the gun's outline. Everything felt different. Entering the school, like I was dreaming. The school itself almost looked like a set on a TV show. All conversation blurring like background murmurs. I suppose, looking back, that I had detached myself emotionally from the situation. I was calm and collected as I walked the halls, looking for my victims. I was early and classes hadn't started yet, but I figured John Carter would be in the gym shooting hoops. I made my way down the corridor that led to the athletics wing with determination. "Harold!" I heard a familiar voice and stopped. I turned to see Mr. Artist standing at his office door. "Come on in. I need to speak with you." "Hey, it's good to see you." I awkwardly smiled back at him. "Listen, I'm kind of busy right now. Can this wait?" I was a man on a mission, and I didn't want to lose my momentum. "No, afraid it cannot. Come on in." His tone was kind, but the sternness was undeniable. He held the door open to his office and entered behind me. I asked him why he wanted to see me, but he simply stated that he wanted to talk. He asked me how things had been while he was away, but I didn't want to talk. The answers I gave him were short, cold, nothing like my usual self. I could tell that he knew something was up, but didn't want to push me. As I leaned back in the chair, wishing he would just leave me alone, my sweatshirt lifted slightly. "Harold," Mr. Artist said, "what on earth is that for?" My cheeks turned bright red with embarrassment at being caught, and my heart started to pound in my ears. I knew it was over then. Mr. Artist was cool, but he was still a teacher. I assumed that the police and my parents would be called, that I would be kicked out of school and possibly sent to prison. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. Words got caught in the back of my throat. My eyes welling up with tears, and I just broke. The weight of the world which I had been carrying finally broke my back, and all I could do was sob. Mr. Artist didn't say a word, just waited for me to compose myself. When I finally did, I told him about everything that had been going on. I had never cried in front of him before, and the emotion that flowed out of me was surprisingly relieving. When the tears stopped and I had run out of things to say, Mr. Artist held out his hand for the gun. "Are you gonna have me arrested?" I asked. "No. What good would that do?" he asked. I couldn't stop apologizing, but Mr. Artist's eyes were kind as he told me that everything was going to be okay. He told me that he understood what I wanted to do, but that it was the wrong solution. Comforted by his presence and finally being able to get everything off of my chest, I almost agreed with him. I gave Mr. Artist the gun, which he said that he would dispose of. I knew my dad would be livid that it went missing, but that was a problem for another day. I thanked Mr. Artist for everything, and went to class. I was late to Spanish, but I told the teacher that I was in the nurse's office. Senora Miller didn't question it. My eyes were still red and my nose was runny. The rest of the class was uneventful. But just as the bell was supposed to ring, the principal came over the loudspeaker with an announcement.
"May I please have everyone's attention? Last night at 8:06 p.m., our school lost a beloved member of our faculty. Mr. Gideon Artis found peace last night after a lifetime struggling with a hereditary disorder. There will be a service on Tuesday for anyone who would like to attend. And all counselors will be available all week for any student of the faculty member who would like grievance assistance. We will now have 5 minutes of silence for Mr. Artis.
There were gasps around the classroom as the announcement played, but Senora Miller quieted us down. We bowed our heads out of respect and sat in silence. I often ponder what happened that day. I wonder if Mr. Artis was a ghost, but seems so real. My mental state that day was far from sane, and it's possible that I hallucinated the whole thing. My subconscious finding a way to stop me from making a terrible mistake. The biggest mystery of all is that of the gun. I know I took it from my dad's drawer. I remember counting the bullets over and over again. I remember the way it felt, heavy in my waistband. And I know that I handed it over to Mr. Artis. The next weekend, my dad went to the shooting range, and I was ready for hell when he couldn't find it. Except that he did find it. It was right there in the drawer, still loaded with 3 bullets. I can't explain the events that took place, but I guess a part of me wonders if Mr. Artis just wanted to look out for me. One final time. We dredged something up from deep underwater. It turned out to still be alive. Partly alive. Something like alive. I wanted to explain how it looked, but every time I thought about how to describe it, I got the worst mental block. Everything went foggy and my head started to hurt. Even when I remembered how it spilled out onto our deck, with thousands of dead fish, I was overcome with a sensation of nausea that left me gasping for air. That's why once it stopped thrashing, yes, that's how it moved, by thrashing. I remember how it knocked over a bunch of equipment. I asked one of the guys to start taking pictures. Not a single photo came out right. They were all blurred beyond repair and dotted with multicolored splotches. So all I have now is my memory. While I couldn't picture how it looked, I knew it was nothing like I had ever seen before. Nothing like anything any of us has ever seen before. All this happened last week. The creature is gone. From best we can remember, it hurled itself back over the side of the boat. None of us can be certain of that, mind you. It's just the best explanation we can come up with together. After that day, all 5 of us had started getting sick. I told everyone it was just the flu, that we're in close proximity all day, every day, in the cold and rain and wind. If anyone was gonna get sick, it would be us. But deep down, I didn't think that was the case. My teeth had started to loosen. There was a lot of blood in the sink when I brushed them. We went about our business and hauled up our catches, brought them to shore and went back out again. Gray waves met the gray sky on the horizon and my ears had grown numb from the endless white noise of the sea. 2 days ago, Vernon jumped overboard. The 4 of us were working at the stern and Vern was at the bow. We never saw him go in, and he never came back up. Under any other circumstances, we would have radioed the Coast Guard. We would have been devastated by the loss of our colleague and friend. But a mood, unlike any I've experienced, had come over us. We had to go on ahead. Forward, into the cold North Atlantic. At night, my dreams were vivid, yet abstract. Colors with shapes and curves, but no edges. No lines. All the while a voice was singing to me, cooing, croning. Yesterday, Amal and Billy held hands and jumped off the port side of the boat. Gervaso and I watched them go. We didn't say a word to one another. We just went back to our respective areas of the vessel. We traveled a good couple hundred miles further out to sea that day. Last night, as I slept, I poked my tongue around the new holes in my gums where my teeth had fallen out. I pressed against the loose ones, and a few fell back against my throat. I remembered the feeling as I swallowed them, but that was quickly washed away by my dreams full of song and color. Opening my eyes to the gray morning made me want to desperately go back to sleep again. Gervaso embraced me after breakfast and stood at the bow of the ship. He made 3 deep slits on each side of his neck, then toppled into the water. The last thing he said to me before he cut himself was, "I'm going to hear them sing." Today, by mid-morning, all my teeth had fallen out. I looked at my new smile in the mirror. It was inhuman, benthic, like the mouth of a strange, pink fish. With the boat on autopilot, I stumbled to my bed and began a nap. It was short, but full of the song and color I had hoped for. There, swimming inside the fountain of shimmering iridescence, was the creature we had seen. I still can't describe it, but my feeling of discomfort while trying to recall it is gone. All gone. In fact, the thought of it now carries a beacon of welcome and hope. Ever since opening my eyes after the nap, I can still hear it. I can still hear the singing. It's coming from far below the boat. Miles and miles beneath the icy ocean. As I look out and I see gray all around me, I feel starved for color. As I reach out and feel the icy wind buffeting me, I feel deprived of warmth. I know what I have to do now. I know where I have to go. At the bottom of all this water, I can find what is serenading me. All I have left to do is to jump. Growing up, it was common knowledge that my cousin Ben was afraid of seaweed. Naturally, we terrorized him with it. Pieces in his bed, pieces in his shoes, and my personal favorite, pieces in his bathing suit. Every time, we were guaranteed a scream and a scramble as he tried to get the seaweed away from his delicate self. Nothing, though, compared to what we'd do to him at the beach. I'll fully admit that we were bullies back then. We didn't know what we did was wrong, we just thought it was funny. And since Ben laughed it off at the end, even if he did cry while it was happening, we thought it was okay to continue. Kids will be kids, right? I was the oldest, and therefore the biggest. Ben was really skinny and small. I could manhandle him pretty effortlessly. I'd dunk him underwater, I'd toss him around, all that. But I'd also hold him still as my other cousins draped him with seaweed. Oh, how he'd scream. Eventually, our parents would get involved. I'd get into trouble, maybe even catch a beating, but nothing severe enough to dissuade me from terrorizing my cousin. One summer, we took a family vacation to California, a little north of San Francisco. Before we left, Mom took me aside and said under absolutely no circumstances was I to tease Ben with seaweed, or do anything whatsoever that might provoke his fear of it. It turned out he had been in therapy for the last few months. I was probably supposed to feel bad, but I didn't. I was 12. I was a dick. Still, I agreed. I wouldn't taunt the poor kid with the stuff. We arrived in California and had a few days of fun in the sun. The water was a little too cold to go swimming, but we still enjoyed a lot of what the beach had to offer. Cool rocks, tide pools, crabs, and all that. True to my word, I didn't do anything mean to Ben. We all had a pretty good time. On the 4th day, Dad announced that he had scheduled a boat trip for Ben and me to go see the seals and maybe even a whale or two. It was just the two of us, plus the tour guide, a pudgy, kind man named Ron. I guess my dad wanted to see if he could help build the relationship between Ben and me. We'd been getting along pretty well since I agreed not to torture him anymore. We set off around 10:30 in the morning, while our parents and younger siblings attended a lecture about a timeshare that included a free breakfast. Ron was lively and engaging. He enjoyed asking us questions to see how much we knew about marine life. Then, if we didn't know, told us cool stories about the biology and history of the area. We saw a ton of seals. They were interested in the boat and followed us along. There was quite a few colorful fish, too. We hung our heads over the edge of the boat as Ron regaled us with fun facts. After a little over a half an hour of sailing, we stopped.
Now, this is the spot where you'll see a ton of biodiversity,
Ron told us.
I've seen whales, seals, octopods, and even a shark or two right around here.
I peered over the edge. I saw movement below us. What's all that stuff? I asked, pointing.
Ah,
Ron replied, apparently delighted by my question.
That's one of the reasons for such great diversity out here. That, Max, is a kelp forest.
What's a kelp forest? Ben asked.
Great big towers of plant life. Some of it grows almost 200 feet long.
Plant life? Repeated Ben, his voice quiet and uncertain.
You got it, replied Ron. This is where you'll find some of the longest and most abundant seaweed in the world. It's also the fastest growing plant on Earth, and can grow 1.5 feet a day.
My gaze shot to Ben, who had turned pale. I had to give him credit, though. He didn't scream or anything. He just took his seat on the boat and stared at the floor. I don't feel too well, he said. Can we go home? Immediately following his words, a whale breached only 30 or so feet away. The seaweed forgotten, Ben hurried to the side and watched, awed, as the colossal mammal launched itself into the air again and splashed back into the depths. The ripples lapped at the edges of the boat, and I heard wet sounds coming from all directions. I stared at the spot, hoping the whale would leap again. Ben was looking down at a chunk of seaweed on the surface. I knew he was wondering how far down it went. Feeling uncharacteristically charitable and wanting to take Ben's mind off of the hated seaweed, I asked over my shoulder to Ron, "What kind of whale was that?" Ron didn't reply. Ben and I stared at the foamy touchdown site of the whale, still hoping it would make an encore leap. "Ron?" I asked again, not turning around. All we heard was the lapping of the waves and the strange, squishy, wet sounds. Again, no answer from Ron. Then, Ben shrieked so loudly, and suddenly, I heard something inside his throat tear. I whirled around and shouted in surprise and fear. A thick column of dark green kelp had pushed itself inside Ron's mouth. Other pieces wrapped around his arms and legs, rooting him in a standing position to the boat's deck. Ben was wheezing and backed away. The kelp wormed its way around Ron, tightening its grip on him. More ropes of it slid up from the depths and joined the others around him. His eyes bulged in a combination of horror and from the terrible pressure being exerted on him. "Help!" I shouted to no one. Over and over and over, the words flew from my lips as bones inside Ron splintered and his flesh tore, dousing the deck and our shoes with his blood. Then, with a mighty jerk, he was pulled off the boat. He remained in mid-air, held aloft by heavy tendrils of kelp. They turned him over and around, then tore him in half. Entrails plopped into the water where the fish waited, and they began to feast. Soon, everything was quiet, save for Ben's torn throat whistling every panicked breath. I had stopped calling for help. We sat, huddled in the corner of the boat. I wrapped my arms around him and we shuddered together for a while. I saw Ron's radio and turned it on. "Help us," I pleaded. "Ron's dead." That was all I said. Before long, a Coast Guard boat came to our rescue. There was an investigation. No one believed what Ben and I told them, but the presence of Ron's blood all over the place, as well as his torn clothing that was found floating in and around the spot we had been, made them think twice about it. Eventually, it was ruled a suicide. Ben and I went to therapy together for a couple of years. We're adults now, and I've long since apologized for how I treated him when we were younger. You won't catch us at the beach anymore, though. We learned our lesson. Privately, I've wondered if somehow he knew that would happen to Ron. If that was the reason why he was always so frightened of seaweed. I guess I'll never know. Still, it makes me wonder what else he's scared of. I already know he's terrified of bees. Has been forever. Now, whenever I hear one buzzing by, I expect to see it. A bee the size of a car, and angry, ready to impale me with its stinger. Maybe I just need a little more therapy. When I was a little boy, I slept like the dead. I would fall asleep the second my head hit the pillow for 10 hours a night. I remember my mother reading me fairy tales just before I fell asleep when I was little. I always wanted to hear how the hero triumphed, but I could never stay awake until the story was finished. She'd continue reading anyways, right up until the end, and the story and my dream would sort of mix into one. But as I grew older, I became less comfortable with the world around me, and I became afraid of sleeping. I started having bad dreams. They seemed real. Too real. I've heard of lucid dreaming, and of people who know they are in a dream the second they enter one. That's not me. My dreams started to feel like an extension of my own reality, and it became difficult for me to know the difference between the dream world and real life. I got caught up in them. I became terrified of sleeping. Onirophobia, it's called. The fear of dreaming. Of not knowing the difference between your dreams and reality. I've gone to great lengths to avoid sleeping altogether. Living life on such little sleep is daunting, but you do eventually get used to it. It's better than the alternative after all. Sufferers from onirophobia have many methods to try and stay awake, and I've adopted these. Coffee is now my best friend. I take caffeine pills, watch TV at night with very loud volume. I blow a fan on me at high settings. I drink a lot of water at night, so if I do accidentally fall asleep, my bladder will ensure that it's not for too long. All of this helps, but it can't entirely prevent the inevitable. I should be clear. Onirophobia is different than the fear of nightmares. That is its own separate phobia. No, onirophobia is specifically the fear of dreaming, of falling asleep. Because when dreams feel so impossibly real, the spectacular dreams are almost as bad as the nightmares. My mother died when I was 9 years old, and this is where the problem first started. I still to this day often dream that she's back in my life. There's no explanation for why she's there. She just is, and it feels real. And it's always so heartbreaking for me when I wake up. As much as those dreams of my mother are agonizing, the nightmares are worse. It's very difficult to explain how they occur, but I'm now going to share the strangest events from last night. I hadn't slept at all in over 4 days, almost a 100-hour period. I knew going into last night that I would lose this battle. No matter how hard I tried, I would fall asleep. I went through my usual routine. I took 3 caffeine pills and had 4 or 5 cups of coffee brewed. I had Netflix on, ready to binge watch yet another season of TV all in one night. I remember sipping my coffee. I was bored with what I was watching and I clicked on the new releases section. I was hoping for something to pique my interest because when I watch things I'm not fully into, I'm more likely to fall asleep. And that's when I heard knocking at my apartment door. I looked at the time. 2:40 a.m. I had absolutely no idea who it could be, so I elected to ignore it. But then it happened again. It was loud. It was aggressive. I approached the door and looked through the eye hole and saw the hallway on the other side. There was nothing there. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Before I knew it, my door slammed shut behind me. I tried to open it, but it was locked. I looked around the hallway. Is anyone out there? I spoke aloud. Only silence returned. And then, the lights in the hallway went out. It was pitch dark. I couldn't see anything. Nothing at all. I heard footsteps moving around me. I also heard giggling. It didn't sound human. And then something started touching my back. Something started breathing in my ear. Footsteps, giggling, breathing, darkness. And then I heard an explosion. I sat up on my couch in a flash. I looked around the room in a panic to get my bearings. The explosion had come from the show on the television and had awoken me. You see, that's how it happens. The dreams come completely out of nowhere. I never see it coming. I never know when it will end. I never know when it will begin. I checked the time. 2:30 a.m. I had barely been asleep at all. Maybe 20 minutes. In frustration, I took another sip of coffee. I surfed the internet. I watched some more TV. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something peering at me from behind a corner. I swept my head to the side in a panic and stared. It was only there for a moment. It was scaly, with yellow eyes. It peers ever so slightly from around the corner, looking at me. So I was still dreaming all along. Was it a dream within a dream? Or had I fallen asleep all over again? Or, most horrifying of all, was I not currently even sleeping? Whatever that thing is, I've seen it before, and it seems to be around every corner. It slowly creeps towards me until I see it. Then it retreats in half a second. I can't get a real good look at it. I'm not sure that I ever want to, and I have no idea what will happen if it even reaches me. That's the worst part of this phobia. It makes you start to believe that you're no longer dreaming, that I'm actually sitting in the real world, where a monster is staring at me from behind a corner. Onirophobia, they call it. But maybe it's not dreams that us sufferers of this phobia really fear. Maybe it's the real world we're unable to confront. Maybe we lie to ourselves and try to convince ourselves that everything is okay. But it blurs the real world and reverie into one. It puts us in denial of reality and the horrors that come along with it. Adversity, anguish, affliction. Its yellow eyes always peering at us, just out of sight, from around the corner. We don't want to see it. We want to keep pretending everything is okay. But it's there. It's there, waiting for us to let our guard down. Maybe when we read fairy tales to our children, we're trying to convince ourselves that everything will be okay. So we keep reading along after they've fallen asleep. Maybe we see that we have more in common with the villains than with the heroes. All of us do. That the world waiting for our children is daunting, callous, and discriminatory, and we ourselves can't face it. It can damage us, kill us. Even when you're a mother, even when you have a 9-year-old son waiting at home, desperate for her to return. A world full in its entirety of the villains our children are taught to fear. Maybe it wasn't nice of us to lie to our children and try to convince them otherwise. And maybe when they figured out the truth, they blended virity with the abstract, and it created onirophobia, the fear of dreaming. Because reality is too much of a nightmare on its own, and dreams either exemplify it or create false hope. It is quite possible all of you out there reading this aren't even real. And when I wake up, you will all disappear. Much like whatever is staring at me from around the corner. And maybe that aberration is with you all right now. You just haven't known to look. I don't know if you're in a house or apartment or a cubicle, but look at the closest corner. Stare. And if you see that scaly face with yellow eyes slowly peer out at you, then you're part of my dream. And if you don't see it, then you're part of my nightmare. There comes a day in every young adult's life when they have to drop the young and realize they're just a plain old regular adult. This usually happens when they're forced to buy something mundane for their home, a piece of furniture or a new appliance, for instance, but are actually excited about the prospect, and even willing to shell out more money than normal. For me, that moment came in the most unexpected way. It was the day I decided I was buying myself a new pillow. A good one. Believe it or not, it was one of the worst decisions of my life. I know what you must be thinking. A pillow? Really? I mean, what could be more insignificant and mundane than a pillow? Well, hang on to your ding-dongs because I'm about to explain. If you looked in my apartment, you might be left with the impression that I'm a pretty frugal person. My dining room table wobbles. My sofa is a little ripped and tattered. My fridge has yellowed with age. And my home decor consists of an old poster I taped to the wall and a signed hockey jersey. I'm not going to say which team, because I know how you guys get. It'll probably start a flame war in the comments. I'm just gonna say it's the best goddamn team in the NHL and leave it at that. Go Wings! Anyways, yeah, walking through my front door, you definitely get the feeling I'm a cheap person. Truth is, up until yesterday, I was still a young adult. And just didn't care about living the fancy life, you know? But then I did the laundry and saw that my $7 pillow was covered in either sweat stains or drool spots. And I decided to take the plunge, so to speak, and come out of my youth cocoon into the, fully matured adult butterfly that I am today. No more discount pillows. I was buying the most expensive memory foam pillow I could find. Well, also, my neck has been hurting a lot lately, and the doc said it was probably a good idea to get one. Screw getting old, man. So there I was at the store, looking at a wall-to-wall display of pillows, and not really being able to tell the difference except for the price tags. I chose my new sleeping partner and went home, expecting a good night's sleep. And that's exactly what I got. Imagine resting your head against the bosom of an angel. Imagine being cradled tenderly in a cloud. Imagine being sprawled out against a pillowcase full of purring kittens. Minus the purring. And the claws. It was comfortable, is my point. My head sunk into the foamy surface like I was sleeping on a marshmallow, and I was off to dreamland. I woke up feeling awesome, better than I had felt in months. Problem was, when I sat up and looked at my pillow, I saw the indent left on it. Memory foam perfectly contours to what rests on it, you know? Right down to the eyelids and nostrils. I could see the expression perfectly. Terrified isn't a dramatic enough word to describe it. It was like looking at the face of a shell-shocked soldier, combined with a cashier seconds before the doors open on Black Friday, with a dash of, holy shit, I just encountered an eldritch horror, and I will never be the same again. Which honestly wouldn't have been such a big issue if, you know, the face had been mine. But I sleep on the left side of the pillow. The impression I saw was on the right side of it, facing the impression that I had left. I think I'm just going to stick to regular $7 pillows from now on. Within a mountain there's a city, and deep within the city, near the heart of the mountain, there lies a handwritten note. The note holds the following words. History says the world ended decades ago, when the Earth's surface turned lethal, but we carried on. Our great-grandparents dug into the ground. Their holes became caves. The caves became warrens, and the warrens became cities. The surface world became the stuff of childhood stories, the stuff of legend. Now I fear the stories have caught up with us. As a clerk for City 23, I keep the minutes for our governing council. I hear their closed deliberations. I know their secrets. So while it may be treasonous, perhaps only I can record a full account of recent events for historical preservation. It all began when guards reported hearing strange noises during their shifts at the lid. Guarding the tremendous steel door is an uneventful duty. Therefore, the council assumed their reports were caused by boredom. Still, the guards were returning to the residential caverns and spreading rumors, so the council had them disciplined. This, of course, stopped the reports, but it did not stop the rumors. A few weeks later, we lost contact with Cities 4 and 15. City 4 is prone to earthquakes, but 15 is carved into a mountain, like ourselves. Routine equipment failures were blamed, but since City 4 produced the majority of entertainment broadcasts shared amongst cities, new rumors started to spring up. The council, in response, scheduled concerts in hydroponics to distract the population. When Cities 12 and 18 also fell silent, an emergency conference call was initiated, but the other city governments were just as baffled. The council's response? Wait and see. Then, one by one, every other city went dark. The final message we received was a long stream of static from City 41, from which our technicians isolated a single repeating whisper. The council listened to the message, and although they had no idea what it meant, they erased it to avoid wild speculations. But they can't suppress everything. Not anymore. Now, everyone can hear those strange noises the guards first heard up at the lid. The knocks. They started off faint, but over time one knock was joined by another, and another, and another, becoming thousands. Then, they slowly synchronized into thunderous booms, as if there were a giant outside, pounding on the lid. But the knocks themselves are random. Sometimes minutes pass in silence.
sometimes only seconds. The randomness is maddening. No one sleeps anymore. Nerves are frayed. People are demanding to see what's outside. And yet the council, still fearing panic, refuses to disclose the final message from City 41. So I'm going to stop writing now. I will go tell everyone, and pray they will listen to me. It was a simple message, just a whisper, repeating through the static. Don't answer the door. Don't answer the door. Don't answer the door. Within a mountain there is a city, and deep within the city, near the heart of the mountain, there lies a handwritten note. The note has never been read.
People are stupid. I know I sound like a cynical douche, mostly because I am a cynical douche. I'm well aware that the average person is dumb as shit. I'm no Einstein myself, but even as someone with slightly above average intelligence, I've figured out how to control people into believing what I want them to believe, which I suppose in this case is my downfall. I made a stupid mistake. A big, stupid mistake. I mistook advanced crazy for regular crazy, and now I have to deal with the consequences. A few months ago, I went to a party at my buddy's house. It was relatively casual. BYOB, not a huge deal. I hadn't drank in a while, and a friend of mine brewed his own very potent IPA, which got me buzzed pretty early on. Enter Luna. She was hot, in that crazy girl kind of way. Massive chest, skinny little waist. Not much of an ass, but it was firm and her yoga pants hugged it beautifully. She had soft blonde hair that went down to her waist, and pale, blemish-free skin. She approached me, which is usually a bit of a turnoff. I enjoy the hunt, setting my sights on one particular girl and making her want me. Luna already knew she wanted me. It took away the game. It took away the fun. But I was buzzed and she was cute, so I went with it. I let her ramble on about her interests, feigning interest while mentally undressing her, strategizing my best plan of attack. Eventually, we took an Uber back to my place and had a thoroughly enjoyable time. She was more of a freak than I pegged her for, and I got to do a few things that most girls reject even the idea of. The next morning, I woke up surprisingly not hungover in an empty bed. Pleased that my overnight guest must have snuck out, I stretched, climbed out of bed, and headed to the kitchen on a quest for coffee. It was the moment that I reached the kitchen that I realized the full extent of crazy I was actually dealing with. Luna was in my kitchen, squatting on my kitchen table, staring at my toaster. The springs popped with a soft ding, her eyes opening wide as the toast rose. Hey there, I waved slightly, grabbing her attention. Luna grinned widely before literally hopping off the table. She grabbed a piece of toast and bit it before sticking her finger directly into the raspberry jam and sucking it off her finger. Hey there, she giggled. You sleep a lot. Well, it's the weekend. I don't sleep that much during the week. I shrugged. How long had she been up? I wondered how much of my shit she had gone through. Anyway, I have some plans today. I trailed off, hoping she would take the hint. She did not. After her odd breakfast, Luna skipped to the living room and laid over the back of the couch, feet in the air, hair pooling on the ground, staring at the turned-off television. She really was an odd glass of water.
and I was no longer in the mood to take a sip. It was Saturday, and all I wanted to do was kick back and watch garbage TV in my underwear. Sans the manic pixie dream girl doing awkward yoga on the sofa. Like I said, I'm aware that I'm a cynical douche. I rationally know that I should have just asked her to leave, but at that moment I wasn't really thinking rationally. So I employed a plot that had worked so many times before. I had to out-crazy her. "Hey Luna," I said, heading into the living room and sitting down next to her head. "I have to tell you something." She turned to look at me quizzically. I know this might seem a little weird, but after we shared such a magical night, I felt the need to tell you. I looked at her dead in the eyes. I'm a messenger, sent here by the one true God, Lozo. Luna's eyes grew really wide. She did a quick crunch before pivoting into a sitting position. I figured that would be that. She would leave and I would have the rest of the day to myself. But she did not. "Oh?" she asked with genuine interest. Yeah," I nodded, deciding that committing was the only way to go. "Lozo wants everyone to know who he is, and it's my job to spread his message so that we can all ascend to Blurp and live with Lozo forever." Luna just nodded. "When you approached me last night, I knew you were perfect for Lozo's message. I can see in your eyes that you have the heart of a Lozonite. Just like me." I poured it on thick. "Would you embark on this mission with me?" "Absolutely," Luna said reverently, her eyes locked with mine. I spent the next few hours telling her the rules of Lozonism, which I made up on the spot, with the intention of turning her off. Lozonites were expected to only eat during odd hours, never even hours. Blue foods were never allowed. Lozonites needed to bathe at least 3 times daily, and never ever bite their fingernails. They were also not permitted to wear silk or t-shirts with words on them except on Tuesdays. Lastly, Lozonites didn't own anything. Everything belonged to Lozo. Not only did none of this turn Luna away, she became more enraptured with every ridiculous lie I spun. I was at a loss. Eventually, I just started ignoring her and going about my day. We ended up sleeping together again later that night, because she was hot and I was weak. Luna spent the next few weeks at my place. It seemed as though she was always there, even when I was working. After a while, I almost didn't even mind her. One day, when I got home from a stressful day, I found 2 more girls in my house than when I had left. Luna introduced them as Star and Rainbow, names which I assumed were about as real as Lozonism. But I didn't particularly care. They were hot, crazy hot, and they believed me to be a prophet. I knew that the crazy foursome that happened that night was wrong, but somehow I just managed to quiet my conscience. Over the next few weeks, it seemed like every day there were more and more people in my house, but they were all so pleasant and helpful that I kind of started to like it. I even started telling them made-up stories about Lozo and all the things he wished for us. I know it was wrong and a little insane, but I was having fun and sleeping with a different girl every night. Here's where my problem set in, though. I forgot just how crazy these people were. It wasn't long before they started fighting for my attention, competing to prove who was the most devout. I couldn't even get 5 minutes of peace and quiet. The men were always fighting to be my right-hand man, and the women were fighting to share my bed. Soon, there were whispers of a Lozonite who spoke to Lozo. His name was Zin. I think that Star's recruit Dave brought him in. It was hard to keep track. Zin said that he had spoken to Lozo, who started to ask him to get followers to do things for him. One day I came home to find 24 people in my living room humming the same note, which they proceeded to do for hours. They claim they were trying to tune into Blurp. Another day, I found them recording Eminem songs and playing them backwards, singing along, loudly. Zin even started questioning my devotion. I was done, beyond done. I had let this go on for long enough, not putting a stop to it for a myriad of reasons that seemed ridiculous to me now. I called everyone for a meeting. Somehow, we had amassed over 50 members. They all gathered in my living room, sitting on the furniture and floor and coffee table. I hated them all. I told everyone that Zin was a false prophet, that Lozo told me that he had never spoken to Zin, and that we needed to reject him. Zin protested, but Luna stood up for me. After all, I was the one true messenger. A din of agreement washed over the crowd. I'll admit that I lost control of what happened then. I don't know how. I guess I knew that I couldn't stop 50-some angry people. They grabbed Zin by the arms and legs and hoisted him above the now standing crowd. They duct taped him to the wall while chanting for Lozo. Bakara, another recruit, grabbed Zin's chin, holding it in place. I looked away as he pulled out Zin's tongue and sliced it off. "For speaking lies about Lozo," he growled, and the crowd chanted his words back. Comet took the knife from Bakara and placed it into Zin's cheek, gliding it underneath his eye and popping it from place, then another. "For refusing to see the truth of Lozo," he sneered, and the crowd chanted his words back. Luna then took the knife from Comet and placed it on Zin's chest, driving it into his heart. "For not allowing Lozo into your heart," she cried, and the crowd chanted her words back. Zin's head dropped, blood dripping from multiple points on his lifeless body. Luna lowered her mouth to the chest wound and drank his blood with relish. Soon others followed, some drinking directly from the source, others bringing various cups to the wounds, getting a taste of his body. I realized at that point, I had lost control of my cult. Eventually, I just went to bed. I'm not sure what the Lozonites did with Zin's body. They probably ate it or some shit. I don't know and I don't care. I know it won't be long before the police come for me. After all, these horrific events happened in my home, by members of my cult. I suppose now the best thing to do is to schedule a group suicide. After all, if I'm going down, I might as well take everyone down with me. People are stupid. And I guess I'm crazy.